In 1863, Peter serves as a slave on a cotton farm with his wife Dodian and their kids. When he finds out he has been sold to a new owner, he spends his final moments with his family in prayer before the white men arrive and haul him away, ignoring the cries of the kids. Peter tries to resist the men's hold by shouting and struggling. But when they point a gun at Dodian, Peter immediately stops and agrees to board the cart on his own 2 feet. However, the men now want revenge, so they strike him before pulling him again. Peter and a group of other slaves are brought in a cage as if they were cattle, and through the bars, Peter promises his kids that one day he'll return back for them, while they try to run after him in tears. They travel for a long time before reaching their new working site, which just so happens to be a railroad being built. The living circumstances are 100 times worse than on the plantations. The heads of the slaves who dared to rebel decorate the entryway as a warning. They sleep in cages, and even when they are doing well and working hard, the white owners won't think twice before hitting and abusing them. Even worse, they use the Bible as evidence to support their behavior. There are also many stray dogs in the area, which are dispatched after any slaves who attempt to flee. When a slave acts improperly, they may receive a simple whipping, a quick shot in the middle of the field, or even a brand on the face from their master, Fassel. Fassel has 2 right hands, Harrington and Knowles, who was also acquired as a slave but was chosen to join the guards due to their hunting abilities. Peter does his best to be polite, but even when he attempts to help his comrade Gordon when he falls, he is chastised for attempting to do anything that isn't working. One evening, after all the slaves have been returned to their cages, they must see John being tossed inside while writhing in pain due to the brand on his face. Tomas, a slave, is shaking in terror, and Peter attempts to calm him by telling him to think of his loved ones and to consider this to be simply work. He also gives them the word of God, who is continually keeping watch over them, but John mocks him since it is obvious that there is no God who cares about them. However, Peter remains unaffected by the teasing and assures John that he would pray for him. Later, Peter overhears 2 white guards discussing some crucial news. Lincoln has freed the slaves, and now all of those who were able to flee are making their way to Baton Rouge for help. The conversation suddenly interrupted when a guard notices Tomas made a mistake with the food and intends to punish him, but Peter comes in his defense, explaining he's just a kid. The guard strikes him before pulling out his gun and pointing it at Peter, ready to shoot him for his arrogance, but Fassel stops him since he's taken a special interest in Peter due of his attitude. Later, when Peter is back in the cage, Fassel approaches him and tells him that he is his god and that Peter is now his dog, to which Peter responds that he should be given the same meat as the dogs. Fassel merely chuckles at that time. But the next day he ties Peter and has him kneel in front of him while his dog continues to growl and bark at Peter from just a few inches away. Peter's smell is now permanently etched in the dog's memory. Later, at lunch, Peter informs the other slaves about Lincoln and Baton Rouge, which they might be able to reach after 5 days of walking through the swamp, because it's extremely difficult to survive in the swamps. Some of the slaves are hesitant, but when Peter reminds them they probably won't survive this place either, he gets the support of a few men. Now all they have to do is wait for the right moment to flee. Later on, a slave dies in the middle of his work, and the guards force Peter to bring him to the pit, where all the dead are thrown together. There are several white deserters who should be digging, but when they see Peter, they suggest a black man should do it instead, so Peter ends up filling up the pit with a shovel. Peter understands this is his best opportunity to execute the plan, so he waits patiently for the guards to get distracted by an accident on the field, and jumps on them to kill them with the shovel and steal a knife before running away. When the other slaves and the deserters notice this, they use the opportunity to begin running as well, hitting a few guards along the way, which enables John to grab a gun. Other guards sound the alarm and quickly start shooting the runners, killing as many as they can before they get lost in the woods. Fassel also engages in some shooting, killing the deserters, but he is enraged that Peter got away with it and orders Harrington, Knowles, and the dogs to follow him. Peter teams up with 3 of his comrades and guides them through the jungle, keeping an ear out for any coming dangers. When they eventually locate the swamps, the majority of the group easily crosses them, but Tomas freezes when he sees the crocodiles, allowing the dogs to catch up with him. When the dogs have caused enough damage, Fassel calls the group back and demands to know where the group is going. Tomas, however, refuses to answer. Fassel responds by making a deal. If Tomas reveals where the others are heading, he'll let him go. Tomas, who is in great fear, reveals what he knows and is actually led to enter the swamp, but as soon as he turns around, Fassel shoots him and lets the crocodiles devour him. Peter, John, and Gordon successfully complete the swamp crossing in the meanwhile. Peter believes they should take the alternative path, but John refuses to take any orders and choose the horse track, believing he would be secure due to the gun he took. Gordon wants to follow Peter everywhere he goes, but Peter believes that if they separate, it would be more difficult to find them. After Peter tells him to listen for the sound of Lincoln's cannons, Gordon makes his own path through the woods. After that, Peter starts going his own way but soon realizes his leg is wounded since a bullet had really touched him. He must act quickly to prevent the dogs from smelling the blood, but first, he must run for some time to put some space between him and Fassel. A little while later, Peter discovers a house owned by a white family that also keeps slaves. Peter first takes a vine from a tree and ties it around his wound like a tourniquet before slipping away and hiding behind a stack of logs. This enables him to get some water from the pump and notice the clothing dangling from a rope. Taking a tremendous risk, Peter runs across the garden and takes a shirt before fleeing into the forest, but one of the family kids spots him and rings a bell to warn everyone. Fassel hears the sound and follows it to the home, where the residents inform him of Peter's escape path. Peter is moving as quickly as he can, barely stopping to use the shirt he stole to bind his wound. Moments later, he removes the bloodstained clothing and places it in a trunk for the dogs to find as he hides beneath the swamp water. Fassel and his men fall for the trick and go along the road thinking Peter has crossed the swamp, but he actually comes out after the group is gone. Unexpectedly, a crocodile attacks Peter, so Peter thinks quickly and pushes it away with a sturdy branch before killing it with his knife. At that moment, Dodian suddenly awakens from a nightmare in which she had seen her husband in danger. The children awaken as well and worry for their father, but Dodian assures them that he is alive and will arrive soon since he has faced hardships that no other man has. When night falls, Peter hides on top of a tree and cuts the swamp leeches from his body with his knife, dripping some blood on the nearby plants. When Fassel and his men discover the dead crocodile and open it, they discover it to be empty, indicating that Peter escaped via here. The gang chooses to spend the night camping and feasting on the crocodile, prompting Harrington to really praise Peter on his skill. Fassel immediately scolds him and reminds him of the lesson his father taught him. If you give black people even a small amount of something, they will want more and steal things like their jobs and their farms. The following morning, Peter keeps running and makes sure to keep his body smeared in mud and animal waste, which attracts flies but also masks his scent. When he has to cross another swamp, he thinks about his family and prays to his God to keep the beasts away from him, and when the sun unexpectedly shines on him, he interprets it as a sign. While Fassel divides his troop to cover more area, Peter is lucky to come across an empty treehouse with fresh water and leftover food. There are also some hot coals, which Peter uses to heat up his knife in order to cauterize his leg wound. He then places the coals on the empty bucket and carries them with him as he climbs a tree, throwing smoke at a beehive, frightening the bees away and allowing Peter to collect some honey. When Fassel notices the smoke, he starts riding toward it, but Peter has already left. The treehouse also contains a boat, which a snake is using as its own hiding spot, so Peter carefully kicks it aside with a branch before hopping into the boat and sailing away while tasting the honey. Meanwhile, Dodian is approached by her master, who informs her that he has sold her and that she will leave in 2 days. However, because her new master will provide her with a new husband, she is not permitted to take her kids with her. Dodian makes a very dramatic decision to prevent being sold, since she is terribly saddened by the news, and yet wants to wait here for her husband to return. She walks over to one of the cotton production machines and sticks her hand inside, pretending to be caught in an accident. Back in Fassel, he uses his dog Sniff to locate the treehouse and follows Peter's path as he crosses the river. Peter rushes to enter the woods, where he is astonished to run across John again. John is upset because the white guys would now pursue him as well, too, so he is angry. Peter assures John that he is not being pursued and shows him how to cover his smell, but John ignores him before they begin their run. Soon after, they hear the dogs barking and scramble to hide. John climbs to the top of a tree while Peter enters an empty trunk. Even yet, the dogs are able to track John's smell, making it simple for Fassel and his men to locate him. John refuses to get down, so Fassel shoots him, then demands information on Peter by using force, but John still won't answer. In order to send a message back to camp, Fassel decides to cut off his head and offer it to Harrington and Knowles. Peter shuts his eyes to avoid seeing his friend's death and prays for John's soul. After waiting a few hours to put some space between himself and Fassel, Peter emerges from the trunk as it begins to rain. However, when he does, he is horrified to learn exactly how they killed John, which leaves him feeling completely shaken. He struggles to keep moving while grieving, but then all of a sudden, he notices many horses rushing past, one of which is on fire. Following in their footsteps, Peter discovers a home on a plantation. but everything is on fire, and all the white people are dead. It appears that the slaves here, too, received the news from Lincoln and took matters into their own hands. With his knife ready, just in case, Peter enters the house and makes his way cautiously through the rooms until he comes to the dining table. At that point, he gives up all caution and tucks into the food and wine to refuel his weary body. He keeps going and doesn't stop until he hears an odd noise coming from above. He then follows the sounds and eventually finds a dying girl trapped beneath a harp, which she is playing as a call to rescue. Peter comes to her aid right away, takes her outdoors, and lays her down on a table before attempting to get some water. However, the girl is frightened and compels him to stay as she hands him her cross pendant. Peter accepts it and knows what she needs, a prayer assuring her that God is with her. He's so distracted that he doesn't notice Harrington coming until it's too late, and Peter has to throw his knife and walk away from the girl to avoid being shot. After leaving the girl, she immediately passes away, and Peter is so enraged that he dares to turn around and kill Harrington by using the cross as a stake. In that instant, Knowles also shows there, but Peter reacts swiftly and takes Harrington's gun to shoot him. Knowles tries to convince Peter that a person who can kill a crocodile should be included in Fassel's ranks, but Peter dismisses him as the worst type and abandons him to perish. Hearing Fassel approaching due to the barking, Peter decides to flee into the cotton fields for safety, and when the dog gets too close, he kills it. When Fassel ultimately finds the body, it just increases his resolve to punish Peter. The following morning, Peter lands at a beach covered with the remains of white men who killed in battles with Lincoln's soldiers. Although they don't have any supplies for him to take, Peter can see the ships and hear the cannons in the distance, which show that Lincoln's soldiers are nearby. Excited by the prospect of at last being free, Peter starts to run again, but a horse suddenly arrives by his side, knocking him to the ground with a few blows. It is Fassel who orders Peter to beg for some of the meat he had asked back in the cage. Because Peter refuses to obey, Fassel pulls out his gun and tells him that he is his god, but before he can pull the trigger, someone else shoots him. Peter tells the falling body that he's no god before turning to meet his saviors, who are Lincoln's native guard led by Lieutenant Caillou. Finally, Peter's body succumbs to hunger and tiredness, and the soldiers carry him to the medical tent at their camp in Baton Rouge. The nun nurse makes Peter sleep because his leg wound is infected, and for a few days, Peter doesn't do anything but dream about his family. When Peter feels better, he goes to visit one of the soldiers to get his new documents as a free man, but he has to make up certain details he doesn't know, such as his age. Unfortunately, he is not yet permitted to go and look for his family. Instead, white troops take advantage of the fact that slaves are officially stolen contraband and offer them two options: work on the federal farms or join the army. Peter resists to continue obeying orders, but when the soldier explains that joining the army will allow him to save his family and be free forever, Peter agrees to join. Later, Peter learns that Gordon has been found by the army as well. He is wounded but still alive. Although Peter is happy to see him, telling him about John makes him feel bad. Then Peter goes to visit Caillou for his uniform. But first, he's asked whether he'd be interested in helping the cause by posing for something called a photograph. Peter is dubious, but Caillou assures him that the white photographers are kind people with good motives. It turns out that these men are filming the truth of slavery in order to show the world, and Peter accepts to show his naked back to the camera, exposing the scars of countless of whippings. Following that, Peter is summoned to meet the general, who questions him about any information he may have regarding the railroad that the enemy is constructing. After Peter has shared all of the information he has, the general looks at his photo and remarks that the scars represent disobedience, which is not a good characteristic to have in the army. Caillou tries to take Peter away, but Peter defends himself, stating that the scars imply he's been beaten up a lot, but he never quit fighting, which is vital for a soldier. At first light, Caillou leads Peter and all of his troops to the front lines, where he gives an emotional speech reminding them that they are fighting for freedom. While they are still moving, several soldiers are killed by enemy fire, but the troop seems unfazed and continues to fight anyhow. Soon, there is fire all around them, and Peter is hit by an explosion, which knocks him unconscious in a puddle for a few minutes. As soon as he awakens, he drags his tired body through the mud to continue helping, firing at the enemy whenever he has the chance, and praying for any dying companions he comes across along the route. In the midst of the conflict, Caillou is killed, and Peter ultimately discovers Gordon is also hurt. Seeing his buddy in such agony and terror prompts him to emerge from his hiding place and go toward the enemy lines. His goal is to stop the cannons. Other troops take him as an inspiration and do the same. The native guard is able to defeat their enemies and obtains their victory. Now that the battle is ended, the army goes to every plantation to free the slaves. When they arrive at the house where Peter used to work, everyone is stunned, unable to believe the news, but the excitement soon overtakes their mood when they realize freedom is actually real. After seeing his old master's death at the hands of justice, Peter starts searching for his family and nearly breaks down when he is unable to find them. However, as he starts praying under his breath, he looks to his side and lets God guide him to eventually find his wife and children, who rush to meet him with an embrace. The image of the real Peter became a famous part of history and was seen worldwide. More than 400,000 black individuals were able to flee to freedom in 1863 as a result of Lincoln's proclamation. By 1865, over 4 million slaves in America had been declared free.